an interesting topic that I've heard about, complained about for my 25 years in this job. And this bill, this omnibus package here changed it, which is for redistricting, proportioning districts. Those that are incarcerated used to always be counted as part of the jurisdiction or district that they are incarcerated in. So not only are they being taken from their inner city communities, which is a lot of the people, especially if we're talking about Chicago, they're taken out of their inner city community. They're housed downstate and across the state, mostly in rural areas. Those rural areas are getting jobs for incarcerating them, getting resources and funding. And then those people in the prisons are being counted as if they're residents of that community for redistricting. And that is now ended. And they're getting counted where their home, where their last known residence was, which is only, in my view, the sane thing to do. Anything less is mind-boggling, because basically you're taking more money out of the communities. Besides ripping them out of the community, you're taking resources that would be proportioned to those districts, right? To those communities, you're taking that from them.
It's actually interesting, because this is a talking point that actually comes from the opponents of the bill, and it's actually not true. This bill doesn't affect money. Nothing about this bill affects money, which doesn't mean it's not important, but it does mean that, when you hear fear-mongering about this is going to bankrupt small towns that have prisons and we need these resources for X, Y, and Z, there's a COVID edge to it where they'll note that they need, hospital resources because prisoners are local hospitals, which is true. But it's beside the point, because this doesn't affect any money. It affects representation. It affects how we decide who gets representatives in the General Assembly, in the state, in Congress. And it's so important. Like you said, it's basic fairness. I mean, we do this every 10 years. Most prison sentences are less than 10 years. They don't live there. There's no reasonable argument to be made that for the purpose of representation, they either live in those communities or share interests with people who live in those communities. They've been forcibly removed from their homes. It's not, it's really very basic common sense. It's amazing we got it done. This is a problem all over the country. Very few states, if any, have succeeded at getting this done. What's even better, and I think is probably part of the reason, I'm speculating somewhat here, but I think is part of the reason why this bill moved so quickly and moved in January, was that if it had moved later, we would have missed the ability to do this for the 2020 census. So we would have instead not been able to do this until 2030. But redistricting meets in 2021. So we will be able to, basically put this in place immediately. And that wouldn't have happened that potentially could have not happened if we'd waited to do this. It's huge. It'll be very interesting to see what it changes. I think nobody knows particularly, because we don't take a census of where prisoners are from. Mm-hmm. But it's just common sense, and it's a huge reform.
I harp all the time on the show, and I'm going to continue to, about just how dysfunctional our criminal justice system is. I read this line in a summary of the bill that I've read, and it kind of blew me away that this wasn't already happening. This creates a mechanism for the Illinois Department of Corrections to electronically track an incarcerated person's last known address.
That's a crazy one.
So what they're telling us is, up until 2021, January of 2021, the Illinois Department of Corrections didn't have it in their databases about where people came from. That's not in their data?
It's worse. Like, you have to understand how far behind our data systems are on criminal justice, which is something the Pretrial Fairness Act is actually working to address. Not only does IDOC not keep that data, but I mean, it was relatively recently we had prisons that didn't have wireless internet. I mean, our prisons are in tiny, isolated places, right? They're very, very far from other things. our technology is hugely outdated. And I think even the people within the department who have a genuine desire to improve uh, often are sort of hamstrung because they don't have the data that's necessary to make those decisions. So, and that's, basically all through the Pretrial Fairness Act. When we were talking about pretrial, we included a provision that said, and also we need to figure out what the data is on this, how we're going to collect it from every county, and make sure there's a mechanism there to make it public. Because right now we don't do any of that.
Yeah, it's astounding. And we've had Deborah Witzberg, who's Deputy Public Safety Inspector General for the city of Chicago. She's been on the show 3 times in the 10 months we've been going, but they've kept issuing report after report after report of just how broken the data systems and the data accountability and like even responding to subpoena practices within the CPDR. I think people imagine because you can so quickly do certain things online that your police department is going to be, or your justice system or justice agency is going to be so much more advanced, and they really aren't. And this is why, in my opinion, the leader should pay the price. You took over, you're now leader, especially anyone that's been there 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Why haven't you been championing these issues?
And this is here. I'm gonna give my hobby horse, and it's funny if anyone who knows me in policy land is watching this, because I really do bring it up all the time. It is because Illinois is unique among all 50 states in that we do not have Freedom of Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act in Illinois does not apply to the court system. It does apply to the CPD. They mostly, their problems are structural rather than legal. But a lot of this court data, there's a court decision that says they don't have to respond to FOIA requests, which was not the intent of the original law. It's an interpretation. Basically, the judiciary interpreted themselves out of the Illinois FOIA statute. And so that's something that if there's no mechanism to force an organization or, a part of government to make data available, not only are they likely to not make it public themselves, but they're also likely not to keep it in a way that is clean and accessible, even if people do ask, because they don't have to. It's not operationally important to them.
So two things. One, we're 3 years into a FOIA lawsuit. No problem. 3 years into a FOIA lawsuit on the Chicago Police Department. I could go on that forever. People can see those FOIAs on our website. We are in the midst of getting ready to sue the Illinois Department of Corrections for a series of FOIA violations. That will be this spring for sure. Yes, we have an agreement with Judge Evans that is now 5 years old, going on 6, maybe 6 years old now, that grants us access to every piece of data they collected since they first started collecting data till through today. We can't get a foundation to give us $25,000 to pay the old clerk. We couldn't get a foundation to give us $25,000 to open up all that data. And now the new clerk, Iris Martinez, we are talking to her chief of staff, I believe, and we're trying to see when they said they would honor that request. So we're trying to see when we're going to get that data. But yeah, that's a huge problem. And just real quick before I got a couple more questions for you, but everyone, our Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, may be great, may be bad, make your own opinion. He authored a bill a few years ago he was a senator, as I remember, right? I think he was in the Senate. But anyways, in the Illinois General Assembly, he authored a bill to exempt prosecutors from the Illinois Freedom of Information Act, basically saying they were created in the Illinois Courts Act and thus are exempt from FOIA just like the courts. It went nowhere, but Mr. Attorney General Transparency Reform, I'm the best guy ever, tried to exempt prosecutors from FOIA in Illinois. A little context always helps.